A veteran and his dog saved an elder. Then God moved his heart to give them his brewery. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was a cold, bitter evening when John, a war-torn veteran, trudged down the empty, snow-dusted streets of his small town. His loyal dog, Max, walked faithfully by his side, a constant companion in a life that had offered little but hardship. John wasn't much of a talker. His battle-worn face told a story of its own. He had served his country, seen the horrors of war, and now found himself abandoned by a society that seemed to have moved on without him. His days were spent searching for odd jobs, his nights spent in a cramped, makeshift shelter. John had come a long way since the battlefields, physically and mentally, but the scars of war were still fresh in his mind. Max, a 6-year-old German shepherd, was his constant comfort, the one creature who understood him without a single word. As they walked through the nearly empty streets of Birchwood, the wind howled through the branches of the barren trees, sending shivers down his spine. The town, like John, seemed forgotten, lost in time. A few lights flickered in the windows of homes, but mostly, the streets were deserted, as if the town itself had been abandoned. Just as John was about to turn the corner and head back to his shelter, he heard a faint sound, a cry for help. It was weak, desperate, almost drowned out by the wind, but it was there. Without a second thought, John ran toward the sound, Max right behind him, his ears pricked up, ready to spring into action. They followed the sound to a small, run-down house at the edge of town. A frail woman, no more than 70 years old, was trapped beneath a fallen tree branch in her front yard. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear as she tried to free herself, but the weight of the branch was too much for her to move on her own. Without hesitation, John rushed to her side. He knelt beside her, his strong hands lifting the branch with surprising ease, despite his own exhaustion. Max stood watch, his amber eyes scanning the surroundings, his body tense, ready to protect. The woman let out a soft gasp as she was freed. "Thank you," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "You saved me." John nodded, not needing to say anything. His actions spoke louder than words ever could. The woman introduced herself as Mabel Halloway, the owner of the town's once thriving brewery. Her face, though lined with age, carried a certain grace, and there was a warmth in her eyes that made John feel, for the first time in a long while, that he had done something right. As John helped her to her feet, Mabel's hand rested on his arm, and she looked at him with gratitude and something else, a recognition. "You have a good heart," she said softly. "I've seen many people come and go, but you're different. You remind me of my late husband. He was a man who believed in kindness, no matter the cost." John didn't know what to say. He had never been one for compliments, especially from strangers. But something in her words stirred a feeling deep inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging, of purpose. After a moment, Mabel smiled faintly. "Come inside, dear," she said, motioning toward her small cottage. "You must be hungry. I'd like to thank you properly." John hesitated but followed her inside. The warmth of the cottage was a stark contrast to the cold winds outside. The smell of freshly baked bread and cinnamon filled the air, making his stomach growl. It had been days since he had last eaten anything substantial. Mabel prepared a meal for the two of them, and as they ate, she began to tell John about her life. She spoke of her late husband, a man who had built the brewery from the ground up, of their dreams and struggles. She spoke of how the brewery had once been the heart of the town, a place where people gathered, where memories were made. But now, it was just a memory, an abandoned relic of the past. As the evening went on, Mabel grew quieter, and John could sense a weight on her heart. Finally, she spoke again. "I want to give you something," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't have much left, but the brewery, it's yours if you want it. You've shown me that there's still goodness in the world, and I believe you can bring it back to life." John stared at her, shocked. He hadn't expected this, not in a million years. A brewery? It seemed impossible. But Mabel's eyes were filled with sincerity, and something inside him stirred. Could this be the change he had been waiting for? Was this the new purpose he had been searching for? John sat quietly for a moment, the weight of Mabel's words settling on his shoulders. The thought of inheriting the brewery was overwhelming, yet it stirred something inside him that he hadn't felt in years, a spark of hope. Mabel, now sitting across from him, watched him closely, her eyes filled with trust. It was a silent exchange, one that conveyed more than words ever could. John wasn't sure what to say. He had never imagined his life would lead him here, to this point. A veteran, alone in the world, about to take ownership of a once thriving business. The thought seemed surreal. Max, his loyal dog, lay at his feet, sensing his unease. The old German shepherd shifted slightly, his amber eyes looking up at John, as if to say, "You can do this." The warmth of the cottage was in stark contrast to the cold winds outside, and for a brief moment, John allowed himself to feel the comfort of safety. But the thought of running a brewery, something he had no experience with, made him uneasy. He had spent years fixing things, mending what was broken, but this was different. It was more than just physical repairs. It was about restoring a community, breathing life back into something that had long been forgotten. "I don't know where to begin," John finally said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "I've never run a business. I've been a soldier, a mechanic, but this is a different kind of challenge." Mabel smiled softly, a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "You don't have to do it alone," she said gently. "You have Max, and you have me. I'll help guide you. The community needs this place to come back to life, and I believe you're the one who can do it." John nodded, the weight of her trust heavy in his chest. He didn't know how he would do it, but the thought of giving up was impossible. It wasn't just about the brewery, it was about something deeper. It was about proving to himself that he still had a purpose, that he could still make a difference. "Thank you," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mabel's eyes softened, and she stood, moving towards the back of the room. She returned with a thick envelope in her hands. "This is the deed to the brewery," she said, handing it to him. "Everything is in there. The history, the legacy, and the keys to the future. It's all yours, John. But remember, this is not just a business. It's a gift, a second chance for both you and this town." John took the envelope, his hands trembling slightly as he held it. He had always been a man of action, not words, but this moment left him speechless. The reality of what was happening began to settle in. The brewery was no longer just a distant dream, it was now his responsibility. His future. He could feel the eyes of the town on him, watching, waiting. Would he rise to the challenge, or would he let it slip through his fingers? With the deed in his hands, John stood up, his resolve beginning to solidify. Max stood with him, his loyal companion, as they walked to the door. Mabel followed them, her footsteps light despite her years. "I'll help you get started," she said as they stepped outside, the cold air biting at their faces. "There's still a lot of work to be done, but we'll take it one step at a time." John nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. There was no turning back now. The brewery, the town, and his future were all intertwined in this one moment. It was a chance to start over, to heal the wounds of his past, and to give something back to the community that had given him so little. As John and Max walked toward the brewery, the sky above them began to clear. The storm had passed, and in its wake, the world seemed to breathe again. John could feel the weight of the past lifting from his shoulders, replaced by the anticipation of what was to come. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he wasn't alone. He had Max by his side, and now he had a purpose. The brewery was his, and it was time to make it thrive once again. John stood in front of the brewery, its worn-down exterior a shadow of its former glory. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees as he felt the weight of the task before him. Max, his loyal German shepherd, sat beside him, as always, with his head turned slightly toward John, sensing the tension in the air. It had been a week since John received the keys to the brewery from Mabel, and every day had been a new challenge. He had spent the first few days walking through the brewery, taking inventory of the equipment and imagining how it could all come back to life. The place had potential, but it needed a lot of work. The walls were peeling, the brewing equipment was covered in dust, and the air was heavy with the scent of neglect. But John was determined. He had been through worse. War, loss, solitude. All of that had prepared him for a moment like this. There was something about the brewery, something that called to him. Maybe it was the legacy of Mabel's husband, or maybe it was the town itself, waiting for someone to breathe new life into it. Whatever it was, John couldn't shake the feeling that this was his chance to do something meaningful. As he walked around the brewery, his mind raced with possibilities. He could already see the place bustling with customers, the smell of fresh beer filling the air. But first, he had to fix the place up. It was a big job, one that would take time, but he wasn't going to do it alone. The first step was simple: clean up. John spent the next few days sweeping, scrubbing, and clearing out debris. Max was his constant companion, never straying far from his side, always ready to lend a hand, or a paw. It was hard work, but it felt good to be doing something productive. As John worked, he couldn't help but think about the people in the town. They had always treated him like an outsider, never truly accepting him. But this brewery was different. It was a chance to show them that he was more than just a war veteran who had lost his way. He was someone who could build, who could create, and who could give back. On the fourth day of cleaning, there was a knock on the brewery's door. John paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and walked over to answer it. When he opened the door, he was surprised to see Mabel standing there, her small frame bundled up in a thick coat. "I brought you something," she said, holding out a small basket. "It's from the bakery. Thought you could use some comfort food." John smiled, touched by the gesture. He hadn't realized how much he missed the simple pleasures of life, like a warm meal. He took the basket from her, feeling a rush of gratitude. "Thank you, Mabel. I appreciate this more than you know." Mabel smiled back, her blue eyes twinkling. "I know it's hard work, but you're doing great. Just remember, you're not alone. The town needs this place, and I'm here to help." With those words, she turned to leave, but before she could go, she paused. "By the way, I spoke to some of the people in town. They're curious about the brewery. They want to know if it's reopening. Maybe it's time to make it official." John looked at her, surprised. He hadn't expected people to be so interested so soon. "I haven't even gotten the place fully cleaned up yet," he said with a chuckle. Mabel grinned. "It's never too early to start. Besides, the town needs something to look forward to." With that, she waved and walked away, leaving John standing in the doorway, deep in thought. Could he really reopen the brewery so soon? Was the town ready for it? He wasn't sure, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to back down now. The next morning, John made his decision. He called a meeting with the town's residents, inviting them to come see what he had been working on. As the sun began to set, people trickled into the brewery, their faces filled with curiosity. John stood at the front, feeling a little nervous, but also determined. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know this town has been through a lot, and so have I, but I believe in this place. I believe in the brewery, and I believe in the people of Birchwood. This is our chance to rebuild, to create something special again." The crowd listened in silence, and for the first time in a long while, John felt like he had the town's attention. People began to nod, murmuring among themselves. Some even smiled, their skepticism slowly fading away. It wasn't going to be easy, but John could see the spark of hope starting to grow in their eyes. With a deep breath, John stepped forward. "I want to make this a place for everyone. A place where we can come together, share a drink, and celebrate what we've built. It's going to take time, but I promise you, we'll get there." The crowd erupted into applause, and for the first time in a long time, John felt the weight on his shoulders lift, replaced by a sense of purpose. The journey was just beginning, but he knew one thing for sure: he was not alone anymore. The next few weeks were a blur of activity and hard work. John threw himself into fixing the brewery, determined to make it a place that the town would be proud of. He spent long hours sanding down the worn-out wood, fixing broken equipment, and cleaning the place from top to bottom. Max, always by his side, became a familiar sight to the townspeople as they passed by. As John worked, he began to feel a connection to the place, as if the brewery had been waiting for him all along. It was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a piece of the town's history, a legacy that could still be saved. The work was grueling, but each day brought new progress. Slowly but surely, the brewery began to transform. The old taps were polished, the floors were scrubbed, and the brewing equipment, once covered in dust, was cleaned and ready to go. John knew he was getting closer, but there was still so much to do. He needed help, and he wasn't too proud to ask for it. One afternoon, Mabel stopped by with a box of supplies. "I brought you some new ingredients," she said, her hands shaking slightly as she passed him the box. "Thought you could use them for the first batch." John smiled, grateful for her help. "Thank you, Mabel. I've been so focused on fixing the place up that I almost forgot about the brewing part." She laughed softly. "You can't have a brewery without beer, can you?" They shared a quiet moment, and for the first time in a long while, John felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. The next day, he began brewing his first batch of beer. It was a simple recipe, nothing fancy, but it was a start. As he carefully measured out the ingredients and mixed them together, he couldn't help but think about how far he had come. Not just in the brewery, but in life. He had started as a broken man, haunted by memories of war, lost, and alone. But now, he was building something that could give back to the community that had once overlooked him. After a few days, the first batch was ready to be tasted. John nervously poured the beer into 2 glasses, handing one to Max, who took a cautious sip. The beer was a little bitter, but it had a richness to it that made John smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. He raised his glass to the memory of Mabel's husband, the man who had built the brewery with his own hands. This was his legacy now, and John was determined to honor it. The following week, John invited the townspeople to come and try the beer. The turnout was better than he expected. People walked through the doors with a mix of curiosity and skepticism, unsure if this was really the beginning of something new. But as they tasted the beer, something changed. The mood in the room lightened. Smiles spread across faces, and soon, the brewery was filled with the sound of laughter and conversation. It wasn't just about the beer. It was about the sense of community, of coming together after years of hardship. The brewery was more than just a place to drink. It was a place to heal, to reconnect, and to build something new from the ashes of the past. As the evening wore on, John stood behind the bar, serving drinks to the locals. It was a feeling he had never experienced before. He wasn't just the outsider anymore. He was part of the town. People came up to him, shaking his hand and offering words of encouragement. "You've really done it," one man said, his voice filled with admiration. "This place feels alive again." John smiled, grateful for the recognition, but he knew there was still a long way to go. The brewery was just the beginning. There was still so much work to be done, so many dreams to chase. But for the first time in a long time, John felt a sense of pride. He had a purpose, and that purpose was to make the brewery a place that everyone could be proud of. As the night came to a close, John stood outside, looking up at the stars. Max sat by his side, his head resting on John's knee. For the first time in years, John felt at peace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. The brewery was just the start of something bigger. He had a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. The weeks that followed brought more challenges, but also a sense of pride that John had never known. The brewery, which had once been a forgotten building on the edge of town, was now a place of life and hope. The first batch of beer was a success, and the townspeople were beginning to visit more regularly, their skepticism slowly turning into trust. John worked tirelessly, making sure everything ran smoothly. Max was always by his side, a constant reminder that he wasn't alone in this. One morning, as John was setting up for the day, Mabel stopped by with a letter in her hand. "This came for you," she said, handing it over. John took the letter, curious. The envelope was thick, and the return address was unfamiliar. "Who's it from?" he asked, turning it over in his hands. "I'm not sure," Mabel replied. "It's from out of town, though. Maybe it's good news." John hesitated for a moment before tearing open the envelope. Inside was a letter from a local investor, someone who had heard about the brewery's reopening and was interested in getting involved. The letter was full of praise for the work John had done so far and offered a substantial sum of money to help expand the brewery in exchange for a stake in the business. John felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. This was the kind of opportunity he had been hoping for, but it also meant giving up some control. He wasn't sure if he was ready for that. He had spent so many years on his own, relying only on himself, that the thought of sharing the brewery with someone else was a little intimidating. But as he sat down at the bar and read the letter again, he realized this could be the key to the brewery's future. With the investors' help, they could expand production, hire more staff, and make the brewery a true cornerstone of the community. The decision wasn't easy, But John knew that growth was necessary if he wanted to keep the dream alive. The following week, John met with the investor at a local diner. The man was well-dressed, with a sharp suit and an even sharper smile. He introduced himself as Richard Parker, a businessman with a long history of supporting small businesses. "I've been following the progress of your brewery," Richard said, shaking John's hand. "And I have to say, I'm impressed. What you've done here is remarkable. I think we can do a lot together." John listened carefully as Richard outlined his proposal. The terms were fair, and the money offered would go a long way toward upgrading the brewery's facilities. But there was one condition. Richard wanted a say in the brewery's future in exchange for his investment. John wasn't thrilled about this idea, but he also knew that without the money, the brewery might not survive. He needed to make a decision. As the meeting came to a close, Richard extended his hand again. "Think it over, John," he said. "This is an opportunity you don't want to pass up." John walked back to the brewery, deep in thought. He knew this was a turning point, a moment that would define the future of the business. He was torn. The idea of giving up control didn't sit well with him, but the potential for growth was too great to ignore. As he arrived at the brewery, Max greeted him at the door, wagging his tail as if to say, "Welcome home." John smiled, grateful for his loyal companion. The decision weighed heavily on him, but he knew that he couldn't let fear hold him back. This was his chance to make the brewery something truly special. Over the next few days, John worked hard to prepare for the decision ahead. He met with Mabel, who offered her own thoughts on the matter. "It's a big step, John," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But you've come this far. Don't let fear stop you from reaching your dreams." Her words stuck with him, and by the end of the week, John made his decision. He would accept the investor's offer. The brewery needed more than just his hard work. It needed resources, new ideas, and a vision for the future. With Richard's help, John knew they could take the brewery to the next level. The deal was signed, and the investor quickly became involved in the brewery's operations. Over time, John found that having Richard's expertise was a blessing. They worked together to streamline the brewing process, improve marketing, and expand the brewery's reach. The town began to take notice. Slowly but surely, the brewery became a thriving hub of activity. John no longer had to do everything himself. He had a team, a community, and a future that was full of promise. Looking back, John realized that this was exactly what he needed. The brewery had grown into something bigger than he had ever imagined, and he had the chance to be part of something truly special. Max, as always, was there beside him, watching the transformation unfold. The journey was far from over, but John was no longer afraid of what the future held. Together, with the support of the community, his dog, and his new business partner, he was ready to make the brewery a legacy that would last for generations. The months that followed were filled with growth and challenges, but John was beginning to see the fruits of his hard work. The brewery had expanded its production, thanks to the investment from Richard, and the community was buzzing with excitement about the revitalization of the old business. People from all over Birchwood came in to try the new beer and see the changes for themselves. John had created a place where the town could come together again, a place that had been missing for far too long. It wasn't just about the beer anymore. It was about community, about healing, and about the promise of something better. The brewery became a symbol of the town's resilience, and John was at the heart of it all. But not everything was as smooth as it seemed. One afternoon, as John was preparing a new batch of beer, Mabel came by with an urgent look on her face. "John," she said, her voice low, "we need to talk. There's something going on with Richard." John felt a pang of worry. Richard had been an invaluable partner in the brewery's success, but lately, he'd been acting distant, more focused on the financial side of things than the community aspect that had made the brewery so special. "What do you mean?" John asked, setting down the brewing equipment. Mabel took a deep breath. "I've heard some rumors around town. People are worried that Richard might want to sell the brewery, or even shut it down if it's not making enough profit. He's been talking to other investors, and I'm not sure where his head is at." John felt a knot form in his stomach. The thought of losing the brewery, of losing everything they had worked so hard for, was unbearable. This brewery wasn't just a business. It was a lifeline for the town. It was a place of pride, a place where people could feel connected again. He couldn't let that slip away. "I'll talk to him," John said, his voice steady. "We need to clear this up, for everyone's sake." Mabel nodded, but there was still worry in her eyes. Just be careful, John. I've seen the way Richard operates. He's a businessman, and sometimes that means making tough decisions. The next day, John met with Richard at the brewery. The air between them was tense. Richard was sitting at the bar, a glass of water in front of him, his fingers tapping nervously on the countertop. What's going on, Richard? John asked, his tone direct. Mabel's heard some things, and I need to know where you stand. Richard looked up, his face guarded. I'm just doing what's necessary to keep the brewery afloat, John. The financials aren't as solid as we'd like. If we want to keep growing, we need to think about other investors, possibly even selling part of the business. John felt a surge of frustration. But this isn't just a business to me, he said, his voice rising. This is something that's bigger than profit. It's about the people of this town, about bringing them together. You promised me that we would honor the legacy of the brewery. That's what we've been doing here, and now you're talking about throwing it all away. Richard sighed, his fingers still tapping. I understand that, John. I do. But this is a business, not a charity. I have investors to answer to. If we don't make the numbers work, we could lose everything. John's heart sank. He had been so focused on building something meaningful, something that would last. He had trusted Richard to help him grow the brewery, but now it seemed like the man was losing sight of what really mattered. I can't do this, Richard, John said, standing up. If you're not willing to fight for this place, then I don't think we can work together anymore. Richard's face hardened, but he didn't argue. He simply stood and walked out of the brewery without another word. John stood there for a long time, staring at the door, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He knew what he had to do. The brewery had been built on more than just beer. It had been built on trust, on community, and on the belief that things could get better. He wasn't going to let that go without a fight. Over the next few days, John met with some of the local townspeople. He shared his concerns about Richard's plans and asked for their support. To his surprise, they rallied behind him. They didn't want the brewery to change hands. They wanted to see it stay in the heart of Birchwood, a place that they could all be proud of. We've got your back, John, one of the regulars said. This town is yours as much as it is ours. We're not going to let it slip away. With the town's support, John made the difficult decision to buy Richard out. It wasn't easy, but he knew it was the right thing to do. The brewery was too important to be treated like just another business venture. It belonged to the people of Birchwood. John took over full ownership, and with the help of the townspeople, he continued to grow the business the way he had always dreamed. The brewery became a symbol of resilience, not just for John, but for the whole community. And as the months went by, John felt more and more at peace with his decision. He had fought for what he believed in, and now, he had a future that he could be proud of. He wasn't alone anymore. The brewery, the town, and Max were all part of something bigger than he could have ever imagined. It had been a few months since John took full ownership of the brewery, and things were finally starting to fall into place. The town had rallied around him, and the support from the community was stronger than ever. The brewery was more than just a place to drink. It had become a symbol of hope and perseverance. People came from all over Birchwood to not only taste the beer, but to experience the sense of belonging that had been missing for so long. John had worked hard to keep it that way, always keeping the community at the heart of the brewery. Max was there by his side every day, a loyal companion who had been with him through every challenge. Together, they had built something that could withstand the test of time. But as the months passed, John started to feel the weight of the responsibility he had taken on. Managing the brewery wasn't just about brewing beer. It was about managing people, keeping the business afloat, and constantly striving for improvement. The pressure was mounting, and sometimes, John wondered if he was truly ready for it all. One evening, as John closed up the brewery for the night, Mabel stopped by again. She was carrying a small envelope in her hand, her usual gentle smile replaced by a more serious expression. I've been hearing something around town, she said, her voice low. There's talk of a new competitor opening up nearby. A bigger brewery with more resources, and people are starting to wonder if it's going to hurt yours. John's stomach twisted. The thought of a larger, more established brewery moving into Birchwood was enough to make anyone nervous. I've heard the rumors, he said, leaning against the counter. But I don't know what to do about it. I've put everything into this place. I can't let it go down without a fight. Mabel placed a hand on his arm. You've built something special here, John. People are loyal to you. They believe in what you've done. but it's going to take more than just good beer. You'll need to adapt, to evolve. John nodded, but the uncertainty still lingered in the pit of his stomach. The competition was tough, and he knew that keeping the brewery alive would require more than just passion. It would require smart business decisions, too. Over the next few weeks, John spent countless hours analyzing the situation. The new brewery was offering lower prices and a wider variety of beers, something that John couldn't compete with right away. He knew he had to come up with a plan, a way to stand out in a market that was getting crowded. One night, as John walked home after a long day, Max by his side, he stopped at the edge of town. The stars above were clear, the crisp night air cooling his skin. It was a peaceful moment, but the weight of the future was pressing on his mind. He couldn't afford to let the brewery fail, not after everything he had worked for. As Max sat down next to him, looking up at him with those wise eyes, John had an idea. It wasn't just about competing with the other brewery. It was about carving out a unique identity, a reason for people to keep coming back to the place that had already brought so much to the town. John decided to focus on what made the brewery different, the connection it had with the people. The town wasn't just a place for business, it was a family. John had created a space where people could gather, share stories, and build relationships over a cold beer. This was something the new brewery couldn't replicate, no matter how many resources they had. The next morning, John called a meeting with the staff and shared his idea. He wanted to start hosting more community events, local music nights, beer tastings, and even partnering with local farms to provide fresh ingredients. It wasn't just about serving beer. It was about creating an experience that people couldn't get anywhere else. The team was excited about the idea, and the very next weekend, the brewery hosted its first community event. Local musicians played, people gathered around long tables, and everyone shared their stories. It wasn't a huge event, but it was a start. Word quickly spread, and soon, more and more people were coming to the brewery for the experience, not just the beer. John felt a renewed sense of hope. The competition was still there, but it no longer felt as threatening. The brewery wasn't just about profit. It was about connecting people. As the weeks went by, more events were added to the schedule. The brewery became a hub of activity, a place where everyone knew they were welcome. People came for the beer, but they stayed for the community. The new brewery was still growing, but it didn't have what John's brewery had, a heart. And as the days turned into months, John realized that the best thing he could do for his business wasn't try to be bigger or better, it was to be more authentic. The people of Birchwood weren't just customers, they were part of the family. And John had made a commitment to them that he would keep for as long as he could. With Max by his side, John knew that no matter what came next, the brewery would survive. It would grow and evolve, but it would always remain true to its roots. As the months went by, the brewery continued to thrive, and John's confidence grew along with it. The once empty and dilapidated space had become a vibrant hub of activity, filled with laughter, music, and the clink of glasses. The community was finally beginning to feel the heartbeat of Birchwood again, and it was all centered around the brewery. Local farms were providing fresh ingredients, and the brewery's partnerships with nearby businesses were making it a focal point for the town. John had never imagined that something as simple as brewing beer could transform so many lives, but now, he saw how deeply intertwined his success was with the people around him. One evening, just as John was about to close up for the night, a familiar figure walked through the door. It was Richard. John hadn't seen him since their last tense conversation, and the sight of him brought a rush of memories, both the good and the bad. Richard's suit was crisp, his face as businesslike as ever. "John," Richard said with a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I wanted to talk to you about something." John stood up from behind the bar, wiping his hands on a towel. He hadn't expected to see Richard again, let alone have another conversation. "What's this about?" John asked, his voice steady but guarded. Richard took a seat at the bar, leaning forward slightly. "I've been thinking about your brewery," he began. "You've done a great job with it, but I think it's time we talked about expanding. You've got the community behind you, and now it's time to take it to the next level." John felt a knot tighten in his chest. He knew what this conversation was about. It was the same offer he had feared, a proposal to take the brewery beyond Birchwood, to make it bigger, to turn it into something it wasn't. He had worked too hard to let the brewery lose its soul. "I'm not interested in expanding right now," John said firmly. "This brewery isn't about becoming a big business. It's about something real, something that the town can call its own. I've seen what happens when things get too big, Richard. It loses the heart of what it was meant to be. Richard paused, his expression unreadable. I get it, he said, though his voice didn't carry the same conviction it once had. But you've built something special here, John. And it's only a matter of time before the bigger guys come in. You won't be able to compete unless you grow. John shook his head, feeling a sense of finality in his words. I don't need to compete with anyone. This is Birchwood's brewery, and that's enough for me. Richard's smile faded, and he stood up slowly. Well, if you change your mind, let me know, he said, turning to leave. As Richard walked out of the brewery, John couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that lingered in the air. He knew Richard was right in some ways. Competition was tough, and it would only get harder as the industry changed. But the brewery wasn't just about numbers and growth. It was about keeping the soul of Birchwood alive. That night, John sat at the bar long after closing, Max curled up at his feet. The soft glow of the lamps cast long shadows across the room, and the sound of the wind outside whispered through the cracks in the walls. John thought about the future, about the challenges ahead, about the community that had supported him, and about the promise he had made to keep the brewery true to its roots. As the days passed, John continued to focus on what he could control. He wasn't going to let the pressure of bigger businesses or the expectations of others pull him away from his vision. He continued to host community events, to work with local farmers, and to make the brewery a place where people could feel connected. Little by little, the town began to flourish again. More businesses opened, more families moved in, and the streets of Birchwood started to come alive with energy. People came not just to visit the brewery, but to be part of something bigger, a community that cared for each other. With each passing day, John realized that the brewery wasn't just his success. It was a reflection of the town, of the people who had supported him and believed in the dream he had built. It was a place that brought people together, a place that honored the past while looking to the future. One afternoon, as John walked through the brewery, he paused at the large window that looked out over Birchwood. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow across the town. He watched as families walked by, children playing in the street, and couples sitting on the benches in the park. For the first time in a long while, John felt at peace. The brewery was exactly where it needed to be. He had built something that not only supported him, but the entire town. And in that moment, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he had found his place. Birchwood had become his home, and the brewery was its heart. As the seasons shifted and the years went by, the brewery in Birchwood continued to stand as a beacon of the town's resilience. The once forgotten establishment had become a thriving center of activity, where the people of Birchwood gathered to share stories, enjoy the warmth of a cold beer, and connect with each other. John, who had come to think of the brewery as not just a business, but a part of himself, had never felt more fulfilled. The decision to stay true to the brewery's roots, to keep it local and personal, had proven to be the right one. He had built something lasting, something that the town could cherish for generations. But even with everything he had accomplished, there was still a sense of unease that lingered. John had always been a man of action, someone who didn't like to rely on others. But as the brewery grew, he realized that he couldn't do it all by himself. The pressure of running the business, keeping up with demand, and managing a team was starting to wear him down. He had a great staff, loyal employees who believed in his vision, but the weight of leadership was heavy. One evening, after closing time, John sat alone at the bar, Max resting by his feet. The brewery had quieted down. The last patrons had left, and the only sound left was the soft hum of the coolers and the distant creak of the building settling. As he wiped down the counter, his mind wandered to the future. Would this place continue to thrive? Would it always be a safe haven for the people of Birchwood? Or would it eventually fade like so many other businesses, overtaken by the pressures of a changing world? Just then, the sound of the door opening broke his thoughts. Mabel walked in, her usual warm smile on her face. I thought I might find you here, she said, walking up to the bar and taking a seat. John glanced up, a tired smile forming on his face. You know me too well, Mabel. It's been a long day, huh? She asked, her voice soft. Yeah, John replied, his shoulders slumping slightly. It feels like there's always something more to do. The brewery's growing, the town's growing, but I don't know if I'm keeping up. Mabel studied him for a moment, then placed a hand gently on his arm. You've done something amazing here, John. Look at what you've built. Birchwood is alive again because of you. John let out a long breath, his eyes distant. I appreciate that, Mabel. But sometimes it feels like the weight is too much to bear. I'm not sure if I can do it alone anymore. I don't want to let the town down, but I feel like I'm running out of steam. Mabel nodded, understanding the toll it had taken on him. You don't have to do it alone. You've got a team, and you've got this town behind you. But maybe it's time to think about what you need, John. You've been so focused on everyone else that you've forgotten about yourself. John was quiet for a moment, her words sinking in. He had spent so much time building the brewery, making sure it was everything the town needed, that he had neglected his own needs. Maybe it was time to step back and allow himself the chance to take a breath. I've been thinking about that, he finally said. Maybe it's time to bring in more help, to hire someone who can take some of the burden off my shoulders. Mabel smiled, her eyes kind. You've got the right idea. You've created something wonderful, but you're only human, John. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Over the next few weeks, John began the process of finding a manager to help run the brewery. It was a difficult decision for him, as he had always prided himself on doing things himself. But he knew that he couldn't continue to carry the weight of everything alone. When he found the right person, someone with experience in the brewing industry, but also someone who shared his passion for community, John knew he had made the right choice. The new manager, Sarah, quickly became an invaluable part of the brewery, handling the day-to-day operations and allowing John to focus on the larger picture. With Sarah's help, John was able to step back a bit and focus on growing the brewery in new ways. He started planning for new community initiatives, expanding the brewery's reach beyond Birchwood, and even experimenting with new beer recipes. The brewery continued to thrive, and as the months passed, John's confidence in the future grew. But even more than that, he found himself rediscovering the joy of running the business. He wasn't just managing the brewery. He was part of something bigger, a community that had come together through hard work and dedication. As the years went by, John continued to watch Birchwood grow, just as the brewery had. The town had transformed from a sleepy, quiet place into a vibrant hub of activity, and the brewery was at the heart of it all. John had built more than just a successful business. He had built a legacy, a place where people could come together, share stories, and find a sense of belonging. Looking out over the bustling brewery one evening, John felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The road had been long, but it had been worth it. The brewery had become not just a business, but a symbol of what a community could do when it worked together. And as the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, John knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, but with his team, his community, and Max by his side, he was ready for whatever the future held. It had been a few more years since John made the decision to hire Sarah, and the brewery continued to flourish in ways he had never expected. The town of Birchwood had transformed into a vibrant community, full of energy and possibility. People came from all over, not just for the beer, but for the sense of belonging that the brewery had fostered. The small town, once struggling, had found a new lease on life, and the brewery was at the heart of it all. John had learned to delegate, to trust others with parts of the business that he had once tried to control himself. Sarah had proven to be an excellent addition, managing the day-to-day operations and allowing John to focus on expanding the brewery's reach. It wasn't just about serving the local community anymore. It was about building a brand that could extend beyond the borders of Birchwood. One evening, as John walked through the brewery, surveying the bustling room, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The tables were full, people were laughing and talking, and Max, his ever-loyal companion, sat nearby, contentedly watching the crowd. It was moments like this that reminded John why he had taken this journey in the first place. But even as the brewery grew, John never lost sight of what mattered most: the people. It was more than just a business to him. It was about making sure Birchwood remained a place where community and connection came first. The brewery was a reflection of that, a place where locals could share their lives and memories. The following week, John got an unexpected visit from a local real estate agent, someone he had worked with on a few smaller projects in the past. The agent had a proposal that caught John off guard. "There's a piece of land just outside Birchwood," the agent began, "and I think it could be the perfect location for a second brewery. There's growing demand, and I believe it would be a good investment." John paused, considering the offer. A second brewery? It was tempting, but the thought of expanding again filled him with uncertainty. The brewery had always been about the people of Birchwood. The idea of turning it into a larger business, moving away from what had made it special, felt like a risk he wasn't sure he was ready to take. "I've worked hard to keep this brewery personal, focused on the community," John said slowly. "I'm not sure I want to turn it into something bigger than that." The agent nodded, clearly understanding. "I get it, John. It's a big decision, but it's also an opportunity to continue growing." After the meeting, John couldn't shake the thought of expansion. The idea of opening a second location was appealing in some ways. It would bring in more revenue, more attention to the brewery, and allow him to hire more people. But at the same time, John felt a deep connection to the place he had built in Birchwood. The brewery had become an anchor for the town, and he didn't want to risk losing that sense of intimacy and community. Over the next few days, John spent a lot of time reflecting. He took long walks with Max through the streets of Birchwood, considering every angle. He spoke with Sarah, Mabel, and even a few of the regulars at the brewery, asking for their thoughts. Everyone had their own opinion, but one thing became clear. The heart of the brewery was in Birchwood. Expanding to another town might bring in more money, but it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't have the same community spirit that made the brewery what it was. Eventually, John made his decision. He called the real estate agent back. "Thank you for the offer," he said, "but I've decided to keep the brewery right here, in Birchwood. This is where it belongs." The agent was understanding, though a little disappointed. "It's your decision, John. I know you've built something special here." John smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He didn't need a second location or a bigger business. He already had everything he needed right here. With his decision made, John focused on continuing to improve the brewery and giving back to the community that had supported him from the beginning. He started offering more local events, collaborating with nearby farms and artisans to create special brews, and even hosting charity events to give back to those in need. The town's growth continued, and so did the brewery's. It wasn't about how much money it could make or how large it could grow. It was about making sure that Birchwood remained a place where people felt welcome, where they could gather and connect over a shared love of good beer. The brewery had become more than a business. It had become a home for the community. It had become a symbol of what could be accomplished when people came together, when they supported each other, and when they believed in something bigger than themselves. And as John looked around the brewery one evening, filled with the familiar faces of his friends, neighbors, and customers, he realized that he had built something that would last, not just for a few years, but for generations. Birchwood had a future, and the brewery would always be there to help carry it forward. As the years continued to unfold, Birchwood thrived in ways John had never imagined. The brewery had not only survived, but had become an integral part of the town's identity. The place that had once been a small, struggling business had grown into a beloved local institution. People from all walks of life gathered at the brewery, sharing laughs, memories, and, of course, a few cold beers. The connection between John and the town had deepened over time, and he was more certain than ever that his decision to stay and grow the business here was the right one. But just as things seemed to be settling into a steady rhythm, John received unexpected news that would challenge everything he had worked for. It started as a typical morning. John was at the brewery, making his rounds, checking on inventory, and ensuring everything was running smoothly. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm glow over Birchwood as the town slowly came to life. Max, his faithful dog, was already at the door, eagerly wagging his tail, waiting for their daily walk. But then, as John walked into his office, he was handed a letter. The envelope was thick, the paper smooth and formal. He had never seen anything like it before. As he opened it, his eyes scanned the contents quickly. The letter was from a corporation, a large brewing company that had recently expanded across the state. They were interested in buying his brewery. The offer was significant, more money than John had ever seen in his life. But as he read the letter, something inside him twisted. The brewery was his. It was more than just a business to him. It was a part of Birchwood, a part of him. How could he even consider selling it? John sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. He had always prided himself on the fact that the brewery had remained personal, a place where the people of Birchwood could gather and feel connected. But now, it seemed like everything was at risk. He knew that selling could provide him with financial security for the rest of his life. But was it worth it? The thought of handing over the brewery to a faceless corporation filled him with dread. That evening, as the brewery filled with the familiar sounds of conversation and clinking glasses, John stood behind the bar, watching the people he had come to know so well. The regulars, the families, the friends, all of them were here, sharing moments that meant something. This was the life he had built, the life he had worked for. He couldn't just walk away from it, no matter how tempting the offer was. Mabel came in that night, as she often did. She had been a part of the brewery from the beginning, a steady presence in his life, always offering advice and encouragement. John was deep in thought as she sat down beside him. "What's on your mind, John?" she asked, her voice gentle. John hesitated, then handed her the letter. "I've been offered a lot of money to sell the brewery," he said quietly. "A big company wants to buy it. They're offering more than I ever thought I could have." Mabel took a moment to read the letter, then looked up at him with kind eyes. "I know it's a lot, John, and I know it's tempting, but you've built something here, something real. Do you really want to let that go?" John didn't answer immediately. He looked around the room at the people laughing and enjoying themselves. This was what it was all about. It wasn't about the money or the expansion. It was about the people, the community, the life that had grown out of his hard work. "I don't think I can do it," he said finally, the weight lifting from his shoulders. "This brewery is mine. It's Birchwood's. I can't just sell it to some corporation that will turn it into something unrecognizable." Mabel smiled, her eyes sparkling with pride. "I knew you'd say that. You've always had a good heart, John. And that's why the brewery will always be more than just a business. It's a part of this town. It's a part of you." With his decision made, John knew he had to make it public. The next week, he held a meeting with his staff, sharing the news with them. Everyone was relieved. They had all worked so hard together to build the brewery, and the thought of losing it to a corporate giant didn't sit well with anyone. "This place is more than just a job to us," one of his employees said, looking around at the others. "It's home. It's where we've made memories." John smiled, grateful for their support. He had built something special, something that was worth fighting for. As the months went by, John continued to grow the brewery in ways that stayed true to its roots. He focused on strengthening his ties with the community, hosting more events, collaborating with local businesses, and supporting local causes. The brewery became a cornerstone of Birchwood, and its success was a testament to the power of community and dedication. Looking back, John knew he had made the right choice. The brewery was not just a business, it was a legacy, and it would always be a part of Birchwood. He had built something that mattered, something that would stand the test of time. And as he stood behind the bar, pouring drinks for his friends and neighbors, he couldn't help but smile. This was where he belonged. The years continued to roll by, and Birchwood was thriving like never before. The brewery had become an undeniable part of the town's identity. Every corner of the brewery hummed with life, from the sounds of laughter and the clink of glasses to the hustle and bustle of local musicians and farmers setting up for special events. John's commitment to the community, his loyalty to the people who had supported him from the very beginning, had paid off. The brewery was not just a business now. It was a sanctuary, a gathering place, a heartbeat of Birchwood. John had successfully avoided the temptation of selling out to a large corporation, and in doing so, had kept the integrity of the brewery intact. The decision to stay true to his values had proven to be the right one. But as the brewery continued to grow, so did John's responsibilities. It wasn't just about making the beer anymore. It was about managing an expanding business, dealing with suppliers, balancing the books, and ensuring that everything ran smoothly. For a man who had spent most of his life doing things by hand, the demands of running a larger business were beginning to feel overwhelming. He had Sarah, his trusted manager, by his side, but even with her support, there were times when John felt like he was drowning in responsibilities. One afternoon, after a particularly long day of meetings and planning, John found himself sitting in his office, staring out the window. The sun was beginning to set over the brewery, casting a golden light over Birchwood. Max lay at his feet, content and relaxed, but John felt far from it. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt truly at peace. The weight of the brewery's success, while a great achievement, was also a constant source of pressure. He had built something meaningful, something that mattered to the town, but in the process, he had lost sight of something: himself. He sighed and rubbed his eyes. What's the point of all this, he thought to himself, if I don't take care of myself? What good is it if I lose who I am along the way? At that moment, there was a knock on his office door. It was Sarah, and she had a concerned look on her face. John, she began softly, you've been working nonstop. Maybe it's time to take a break. You've earned it. John looked at her, surprised. He hadn't realized how much of himself he had given to the brewery. I'm fine, Sarah, he said, though his voice didn't carry the usual conviction. I just need to keep things running smoothly. Sarah sat down across from him, her gaze steady. John, you've done everything. This brewery is a success because of your vision, your hard work. But the people here care about you, too. You can't give everything to the brewery and nothing to yourself. You've built something lasting, but you need to take a step back before it's too late. Her words hit him harder than he expected. John realized that she was right. He had poured everything into the brewery, the late nights, the endless planning, the sacrifices, but in doing so, he had neglected his own well-being. Birchwood needed him, but so did he. Over the next few weeks, John took Sarah's advice to heart. He started to delegate more responsibilities, giving his staff the space to take on more tasks. He also made time for himself, long walks with Max, quiet evenings at home, and a few days spent fishing by the lake, something he hadn't done in years. It wasn't easy at first. He had spent so long keeping the brewery running that stepping back felt like a foreign concept. But slowly, he started to feel a sense of balance again. He could still lead, still guide the brewery, but he didn't have to carry every burden alone. The town of Birchwood continued to thrive, and so did the brewery. As John took time to care for himself, he began to see the business in a new light. He didn't need to do everything by hand anymore. He had built a team of people who believed in his vision, and together, they could continue to grow the brewery while maintaining the personal touch that had made it so special. One afternoon, as John was walking through the brewery, he stopped to chat with some of the regulars. They shared their usual stories, their familiar faces warm and welcoming. It was in this moment that John realized how much he had changed. He had started out as a man alone, with nothing but his dog and a dream to build something meaningful. But now, the brewery was a place that represented more than just him. It represented the whole community. It had become a symbol of what could be accomplished when people worked together, believed in one another, and supported each other. Looking around the room, John felt a deep sense of pride. He hadn't just built a business. He had helped create a legacy for Birchwood. He had done it by staying true to his values, by never compromising on what mattered. And as he watched the town continue to flourish, he knew that his decision to build something meaningful, something lasting, was the right one. John had found a balance between the work he loved and the life he needed, and it was a balance he would continue to cherish for years to come. Max, who had been by his side from the very beginning, sat beside him now, content as ever. John couldn't help but smile. With the brewery, the town, and his loyal companion, he had everything he needed, and it was enough. Years passed, and Birchwood continued to flourish, its heart beating with the rhythm of the brewery John had built from the ground up. The town had become a place where people came not just to live, but to thrive, where community and connection were at the forefront of everything. The brewery, once a symbol of hard work and perseverance, had transformed into a legacy, a living, breathing part of Birchwood's history. John stood behind the bar one evening, as he often did, watching the familiar faces of the locals enjoying their drinks, sharing stories, and laughing together. It was a moment of quiet contentment for him. Max was lying at his feet, as old as ever but still faithfully by his side. John had come so far from the man who had walked into Birchwood all those years ago, uncertain and unsure. Now, he was not just the owner of a successful brewery. He was a cornerstone of the community, someone who had helped shape the town into what it had become. The town was no longer struggling, no longer the place it once was. Birchwood was thriving, growing, and bustling with life. The brewery had become the gathering place for families, friends, and newcomers. The events they held, the collaborations with local farms, and the partnerships with artisans had brought new energy to the area. John's decision to keep the brewery local, to stay true to his vision, had paid off in ways he had never imagined. But even as the brewery grew, John never lost sight of what had made it special. He didn't care about becoming a corporate giant. He cared about Birchwood, about the people who had supported him, and about maintaining the heart and soul of what he had built. One evening, as he walked through the brewery, John couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. He saw a group of young families enjoying a meal together, a couple of old friends sitting at the bar, and even a few newcomers, still getting to know the place. They were all there because of the sense of community the brewery had fostered. It wasn't just about beer. It was about people coming together to share their lives and experiences, creating something bigger than themselves. Just then, Mabel walked in, her presence always a comforting one. She smiled at John as she made her way over to him. "You've done it, John," she said, her voice filled with pride. "You've built something that will last. Birchwood owes so much to you and the brewery." John smiled, grateful for her constant support throughout the years. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mabel," he replied. "You've been with me since the beginning. I just did my part, but it's the people, the town, that made it work." Mabel sat down next to him, her eyes gleaming with affection. "That's what makes you different, John. You've always cared about the people. That's why this brewery is what it is. And that's why it'll be here for generations to come." John nodded, his gaze turning toward the people gathered in the brewery. He saw the community he had worked so hard to create. This place had become more than just a business. It had become a part of the town's soul. As the night wore on, John felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The hard work, the struggles, the sacrifices, it had all been worth it. The brewery was more than just a building. It was a living testament to what could be accomplished when a community came together. It was a place where people could find comfort, laughter, and connection, and it would continue to be that place for years to come. Max, his loyal dog, looked up at him with trusting eyes, as if to say, "You've done well, old friend." John smiled, bending down to give Max a gentle pat on the head. For the first time in a long while, he felt content. Birchwood was home. The brewery was home. And as long as he had his community, his friends, and his loyal companion by his side, he knew that the journey was far from over. The road ahead would have its challenges, but John had built something that would withstand whatever came next. A legacy, a community, and the heart of Birchwood, forever tied to the brewery he had fought to create. Discover the heartwarming journey of a man who transforms a small town and a forgotten brewery into a thriving community hub in these compelling veteran stories. Through dedication, perseverance, and the unwavering support of his loyal dog, a war veteran sets out to rebuild not just a business, but a sense of belonging for the people of Birchwood. As he faces personal struggles, tough decisions, and the weight of responsibility, these veteran stories reveal the deep connections that shape a community. His journey serves as a reminder that the true value of success lies not in financial gain, but in the lives we touch and the connections we build. Through every challenge and triumph, these veteran stories remind us that it's never too late to start over, to fight for what matters, and to make a lasting impact. As the brewery becomes a central part of Birchwood, these veteran stories show how one man's dream becomes a legacy, ensuring that the heart of the town beats stronger than ever. Whether dealing with adversity or making tough choices, these veteran stories inspire us to look beyond the surface and see the real meaning of community, loyalty, and hope.